Welcome everyone to part 2 of this Blender tutorial series where we're creating this Sci-Fi Tunnel. So this is where we left off in part 1, so we had finished most of the modeling, and in this part we are going to finish up the entire scene. Before we start though, I want to give a huge thanks to this video's sponsor, Sketchfab. On Sketchfab, you can upload your own 3D models and preview them in your browser. You can even view them in AR, VR, or on a phone or tablet. You can also purchase 3D models and assets from Sketchfab's model store. You can even apply to sell your own models on the platform. Check out Sketchfab with the link in the description. Alright, now as I said in part 1, I am going to be using the Eevee render engine in this tutorial. You could totally use Cycles if you wanted to, but I am going to be using Eevee. So I'm going to click right over here on the render properties, and then I will be using Eevee. Now right down here on the Eevee settings, I want to turn on the motion blur, the screen space reflections, the bloom, and also the ambient occlusion. And these are all going to make Eevee look more realistic. Alright, so let's go and add in the lights, and then we'll have some lighting so that we can add the materials. So I'll press Shift A, and for the lights, I'm going to go right down here to light, and I'm going to add the area light. I'll press 7 on the numpad for top view, and then I'll press Z and move my mouse over to go into the wireframe view. So I'll just press G to grab, and I just want to move this light over, just kind of right there in the center of the tube light. Alright, so now right over here on the object data properties on the light settings, the shape here, I want to change it from square to a rectangle. And then we can change the size of the light. So I want to scale it up on the y-axis, just like that. So now this light is more of the size of the tube lights. So now I can press G and Z and just kind of bring the light up, and I just want to stick it right here, just like that. Alright, so we can now just go into rendered mode by pressing Z and moving your mouse up into rendered mode. Alright, so let's just click on this light, and then on the power here, I'm going to make it really bright to like a 1000. So that's going to make it much more bright, and that is good. And then the color here, I'm going to make it very slightly blue, just because I think adding a blue color looks very nice. So just very slightly blue. Now I want to duplicate this light, and I want to put it under all of the other lights. So I'm going to press Z, move my mouse over to go into wireframe, and I'll press Shift D, click and hold with my mouse wheel and just bring it over. And I'm also looking at this from the top view, so I pressed 7 on the numpad for top view. So I can now press Shift D, click and hold with my mouse wheel, drop it there, Shift D, click and hold with my mouse wheel, and I'm just going to continue to do this over all the lights. Alright, there we go. Let's press 0 on the numpad to go to the camera view, and then we can just go into wireframe and see how that's looking, and that is already starting to look very cool. Now I want to add a light inside this big room here as well, so I'm going to select this light right here, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, click and hold with my mouse wheel, and just kind of bring it inside this big room right here. So I can now press S to scale, and I want to scale it up quite a bit, and then I'll press R to rotate, Z on the Z-axis, and I can type in 9, 0, and enter, just so that it's going back and forth on the side of the room. And then I can also kind of move it a little bit farther back and a little bit up, so I'll press G and Z. We're just going to bring that up just like that. Let's go into rendered mode, see how that's looking. Now I do want to make this light even stronger because this is a pretty big room. So on the power here, I'm going to change this to like 2000, so it's quite a bit brighter. And then I do want to select this and press Shift D and just duplicate another light. And this light I'm going to put kind of over here. So now if we go into the camera view, you can see it's lighting up that room there very nicely. Alright, so now let's go ahead and do the materials for the tunnel. So I'm just going to select the tunnel, and then let's click right over here on the shading tab so we can edit the shader nodes. So I'm going to click on new here to add a new material, and I can just call this like tunnel walls. So in part 1 of this tutorial series, I talked about the different textures that I'm going to be using. So I'll have links in the video description if you'd like to download the same textures that I'm going to be using. Now to add the textures in, I'm going to be using a Blender add-on called the Node Wrangler, and it's built into Blender. So if you don't have that add-on enabled, just click right up here on Edit and then open up the Preferences. And then right over here under Add-ons, you can just go to the search and type in Node, and then you can see that there's this Node Wrangler add-on. So it's built into Blender, so you can just check mark it to turn it on, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. Okay, we can just close the user preferences. So now that we have that add-on turned on, to automatically set up all the materials, I'm going to click on the principled BSDF to select it, and then I'm going to press Ctrl-Shift-T. And that is going to open up Blender's file browser, and then you can just locate to wherever you save the textures. So just go to the Painted Plaster 017 textures. When you download the texture from Ambient CG, you're going to need to extract the zip file and then just go into the folder. Now inside the folder, you're probably going to see a bunch of different things like a preview and some other things like that. I only want to use the color, the normal GL, and the roughness. So I'm just going to hold down the Control key and click on the color, normal GL, and the roughness. And then just click on Principled Texture Setup. And because we turned on the Node Wrangler add-on and used that Principled Texture Setup feature, you can see that the Blender add-on used the name data. So it saw that this was color, it saw that this was normal and roughness, and it automatically set up the material for us. So there we go, and we already have this pretty nice wall material. Now I do want to re-UV unwrap this and play around with the scale and also play around with the colors and some things like that. But before we do that, I just want to add in the material for those metal beams. And then after I add in the material for the metal beams, I can then apply the array modifier, and that way we can re-UV unwrap this and the array modifier won't be applied, so it'll be actual geometry, and that way each texture won't look exactly the same. Because if you look at this right now, you can see that because we're using the array modifier, every texture looks exactly the same, and that's not very realistic. So we will be applying the array modifier in a moment. But first, we're going to create the material for those little lip pieces right there. So let's go back over to the layout, and I just need to select the pieces that I want to be the separate material. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, and I'll press A to select everything, and then press period on the numpad to zoom over to it. So now what I want to do is just select the loops of faces that I want to be a separate material. So I'm going to press 3, and that is going to go to the face select, and then I'm going to hold down the Alt key and select this loop of vertices. And then I can hold down the Shift and Alt key and select this loop, and then also hold down the Shift and Alt key and select this loop and this loop. So by holding down the Alt key, that is selecting the loop of vertices, and then by holding down the Shift key, that is going to select multiple loops. So Alt and Shift, and you can select all of those vertices. So just like that, I'm just going to the camera view, make sure that is correct. That looks good. All right, so now I can go right over here to the material properties. So on default, we have just this tunnel walls material, but I want to add a new material into the material slot on this object. So to do that, I'm going to click on the plus button right here, and that is going to create a new material within this object. Then I can click on new, and I can call this just like metal 1. I'm just going to call it metal 1. And now because we have these faces selected and we have the metal 1 selected, we can click on assign, and that is going to assign the metal 1 to those parts. So if I go into rendered mode now, you can see that as a separate material, and I can like change this color, maybe like just a red color so you can see it. And there we go, that is looking very good. And then also real quick, I'm just gonna select these beams right here, and I will click on the drop down, and I'm gonna add the metal 1 material. All right, and then also really quick, I do wanna go right over here to the world, and on the world color, I wanna turn it all the way to 0 because I don't want any world, I just want it to be completely black. All right, let's press Ctrl S again to save, and then I'm gonna click back over on our main tunnel object. So now I want to apply the array modifier so that we can re-UV unwrap it, and the texture will look different as it goes down the tunnel. So I will click right over here on the modifier properties, and then on this array modifier, I'm going to click on this little arrow and then click on apply. So now if I tab into edit mode, you can see that this is all geometry now. So I can now re-UV unwrap this object. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, but before we UV unwrap this, we need to add a seam to cut it open because we're trying to UV unwrap this. So what we need to do is we need to unwrap it so that the UV mapping is flat and then it can be applied on the texture. The problem with that is that this is a circular object. So what we need to do is we need to add a seam, and that way it'll tell Blender to cut through the seam and then flatten out the vertices. So to do this, I'm going to press 1 and that will go to the vertex select. And then also real quick, I need to tab out of object mode, and I'm going to select this right here, this object, and press H to hide it to get it out of the way. So I can now select this object and again tab back into edit mode. So then I can hold down the Alt key and I'm going to select this loop of vertices, and then I want to do that for the rest of them. So I'm going to hold down the Shift and Alt key and keep on selecting. And I'm just going to select all of these vertices right here. So hold down the Shift and Alt key and select all of those loops. That was the wrong one. Just like that. So now we just have all of those top loops selected. So now I want to add a seam. So to add a seam, you can press U, and I'm going to go right down here and I'm going to click on Mark Seam. That will add a seam, and now if I press A to deselect it, you can see it looks red, but that's not going to affect the render. It just looks red in the preview in edit mode just to tell you that there's a seam there. So I can now press A to select everything, and let me just go into the material preview by pressing Z and moving down. So now we are in the material preview. So I can press U, and then I'm going to just click on Unwrap with everything selected. And there we go, it's UV unwrapped it. Now if we go right over here to the UV editing tab, you can see that it's very nicely opened it up, and it's opened up those pieces and put them flat on that surface. Let's go into the camera view, and then I'm also going to go into rendered mode just to see how that is looking. So if you want to see the texture in the background, you can click right here, and then you can just click on the painted plaster color. And now it's going to show you where it's placed on the texture. So you can see that the texture is scaled way too small, and I want to scale it up so that there's a lot more detail. So with my mouse hovered over this, I'm going to press A, and that is going to select all of the vertices. So just press A to select everything, and then I can press S to scale, and I want to scale it way up, just like that, and just make it really big. And then also, if it's rotated over like this, you could rotate it back. I don't really like it rotated up and down like this, because you can see that these little cracks right here are all sideways, and I really don't like that. So I'm just going to keep it rotated over like this so that the cracks are going up and down. If I just move around, you can probably see some of these cracks. There we go. You can see, like right there is a crack right there, and it's going up and down, and that is exactly what I want. And then you can also see that all of these UV maps are like right next to each other. And I don't really want this because it can kind of make it look like it's duplicating the same texture. So I just want to move each UV map around so that they are just more random. So to do this, I can hover my mouse over any of these UV maps, and then I can press L, and that is just going to select the island. So I can now press G to grab and just kind of move it over, and then press A to deselect. I can now press L and L just to select some random ones, and press G to grab and just kind of move them over. And I'm just going to move them around basically like that, just so that each one is at a different location. And that way this won't look like it's tiled at all. It'll look different for each one. All right, so now that the UV mapping is done, I can go right back over here to the shading tab. And then I can go into rendered mode just to preview this. Now I'm going to click right back over here on the material properties, and I want to click on the tunnel walls. Now this object, I actually want it to be a metallic object. Even though it is like a plaster texture, I do want it to be metallic. I think it looks pretty good as metallic. So on this metallic value, I'm going to turn it all the way up to 1, and then that way it'll actually look like a metal material. Now also, you can see the strength here of this normal map is very strong. It looks very rough. So on the strength here on the normal map, I'm going to turn the strength down to like a 0.4, so it's much less strong, and that looks a lot better. Now I also want to play around with the color just a little bit. So right here on the base color, I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a color ramp node, and I'll just drop the color ramp node right in here. And then I'm going to use a feature from the Node Wrangler add-on to preview materials. So if you hold down the Control and Shift key, you can click on different nodes, and that is going to preview the node. So now that I've added the color ramp in here, it's converted this to black and white because there's only a black tab and a white tab. So I can now start to drag these tabs out, and you can see it's going to make it more contrasty. So when I drag the black out, it's going to make it darker, and when I drag the white out, it's going to make it whiter. So I want to drag them pretty close, kind of like that. So you can see now that's a lot stronger, and it's much sharper of a material. So if I Control, Shift, and click back on the principled BSDF to preview it, you can see that looks a lot sharper now. All right, so now right here in the material slots, let's click back on Metal 1, and let's change this material. So on the base color here, I'm going to make it kind of an orangey color, something like that, and then I'll also make it a little bit darker. All right, there we go. And if you zoom in here, you can see that's starting to look kind of like a metal material. But on the metallic here, I want to turn that all the way up to 1 so that it actually treats it like a metallic surface. So now you can see that looks much more like metal. And then I also will turn the roughness down just a little bit because I do want it to be a little bit more shiny. Now I also want to give it a little bit of normal just to give it a tiny little bit of bump and make it look more realistic. So to do this, I'm just going to use the procedural noise texture and just put it into the normal. So I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a noise texture, and I'll just drop the noise texture right down here. Now again, using another feature from the Node Wrangler, I can just select the noise texture, and then I can press Ctrl T, and that is going to add the texture, coordinate, and mapping nodes. And then I want to use the object mapping instead of the generated, so I'm going to plug the object into the vector, and that is going to place the noise texture around the objects more evenly. So I can now Control, Shift, and click on the noise texture to preview it, and we can see what it looks like. So on the detail here, I'm going to change this to 10 so it has a lot more detail. And then you can see that you're able to see that noise texture a lot right here, but right over here, you're not able to see it very well. And that is because the scale of the objects are a little bit messed up. So what I'm going to do is just select this object and then hold down the Shift key and select this object. Then what I want to do is I want to press Ctrl A, and then I want to apply the scale. That way the scale is applied, so the Blender scene sees them as being their correct scale, and now you can see that noise texture over this object as well. And then I think I might turn this scale up to maybe like a 8, or maybe like a 7, something like that. All right, so now let's take the factor here and plug it into the normal, and then to preview the material, I can Control, Shift, and click on the principled to preview it. Now you can see that it's not really looking very good. It's pretty black and dark, and that is because we need to convert this to normal data, because right now this is just the factor, and so this is just black and white data, but this needs to be normal data because it's purple. So to convert it to normal data, I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a bump node, and I'll drop the bump node right in here, and then we don't want to plug the factor into the normal, we want to plug the factor into the height, and that is going to convert it to normal data. So now you can see that it looks like this metal is very bumpy and rough because of this noise texture. Now it's way too strong right now, so I'm going to turn this strength value way down. So I'm going to turn the strength value to a 0.03. That way it's very, very subtle. If you zoom in here, you can't see it that well. It is very subtle, but it will help to make the scene look more realistic just because it has a tiny little bit of detail and roughness in there. All right, let's press Ctrl S to save, and then I can also press Alt H, and that's going to unhide that top beam that we hid earlier. All right, so I'm now going to hop right back over to the layout here. So there is one more thing that I want to model. I want to model a little bit of a pipe that's going out from the wall and then down into the ground. So let's go ahead and model that. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go right down here to Curve, and I'm going to add the Bezier. I can now press G and Z and just kind of move it up so that we can see it a little bit better, and then I can press period on the numpad to zoom over to it. So on default, the Bezier is kind of like rounded like this. So I'm just going to select this curve right here, and then I can press R to rotate, Z on the Z axis, and I'm going to type in 45 to rotate it over by 45 degrees, but then I need to also type in -45, so it's rotating it back, and then hit enter, and that way we have just a flat piece right there. So now I'm going to click right over here on the object data properties, and we can edit the curve. So I'm going to open up the geometry tab right here, and then under the depth, I'm going to turn that value up, and you can see now we have this cool little pipe here. So I can now press 1 for front view, and then I'm going to move this up so we have a little bit more room. So I'll tab into edit mode, and I'm going to press E to extrude, bring that out, and then I'll press R to rotate, and I'll type in 90, and then I need to type in negative, so it's -90, and then enter, and then I can press G to grab and just kind of move that down, and then E to extrude, Z on the Z axis, and just bring that down, just like that. All right, so now we have a cool little pipe there. So I can now press S to scale, G to grab, and we're just going to put this pipe right down here, maybe scale it up a little bit. And I'm just going to stick this pipe right down here, kind of right down there on the Sci-Fi hallway or the Sci-Fi tunnel. And then also if you want to turn the depth up a little bit and make it a little bit thicker, I think that does look a little bit better being a bit thicker. So now I can press 7 for top view, and I want to press G to grab, click and hold with your middle mouse wheel to constrain it to the y-axis. I'm just going to move that over all the way kind of towards the end, maybe right about there. So let's just see how that is. I do want to make the Sci-Fi box behind it though, so I'll just kind of pull the Sci-Fi box back a little bit, kind of like that. Let's go into the camera view, and that does look pretty good. I do think I'll move it up though a little bit, just so it's a little bit taller. Now I want to mirror it over to the other side, so let's add the mirror modifier. So right over here on the modifier properties, I'm going to click on add modifier, and we're going to add the mirror modifier. Now, because the origin point is in the very center there, it's not in the center of the Sci-Fi hallway, you can see that it's mirroring it over on the wrong side. So what I'm going to do is use the mirror object feature. So I'm going to click right here on the eyedropper, and and then I'm going to click on this sci-fi hallway or the sci-fi tunnel, and now it is mirroring it from the center of this sci-fi tunnel. So now it is over on the other side, and that looks very good. All right, so now let's select the pipes, and I'm going to make the pipe material. So I'm going to click right over here on the shading tab, and then right up here on the shader nodes, let's click on new, and I'm going to call this material pipes. And then I can just go into rendered mode just so that we can preview how that is looking. So again, I'm going to use that feature from the Node Wrangler to automatically set up all the materials. So I'm just going to select the principled BSDF, and then I can press Control-Shift-T. And then once you've downloaded the Metal 024 texture, you're going to get a zip file, and you just need to extract the zip file and then go inside the extracted folder. Now you probably are going to see some other files, but I just want to use the color, the metalness, the normal GL, and the roughness. So I'm just going to hold down the Control key, and I'm just going to select each one. So the color, metalness, normal, and the roughness. And then I'm going to click on Principled Texture Setup. And again, that is going to automatically set up the material for us. And that looks very good. Now, instead of using UVs, I want to use a easy texturing method that I like to use. If you've done any of my tutorials, then you've probably seen me do it before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug the object into the vector, and that way we're going to use the object instead of like the UV or generated or anything like that. And then on each one of these textures, I want to change the flat to box, and then I want to change the blend value to 0.2. So I'm going to do that for everyone. So flat to box, blend to 0.2, and then flat to box, and the blend value to 0.2. And it's important that they're all the same because, you know, the normal map is going to go over the color map, and that's going to go over the roughness. They all need to be at the same exact location. So flat to box and blend to 0.2. That way they're all at the same spot. So now you can see, if I just zoom into these, you can see that instead of using UVs, Blender is just placing the texture very evenly around the object, and then it's using the blend value to smooth out where there might be any seams. So it's a really quick and easy texturing method, and it works really good for kind of random textures like this, like metal textures or dirt textures or ground textures. It doesn't really work well for textures like brick or rock, which require a certain pattern, but textures like this, it works really well. All right, and that is looking very good. So now we have these cool sci-fi pipes. All right, so now let's create the floor material. So I'm just going to select the floor here, and then we can click on new, and I can just call this floor. And then also right over here, I want to click on this object right here, back here, and change it to the floor material as well. And then we can click back over on this object and edit the floor material. So again, I want to use the same Node Wrangler feature to automatically set up all the textures for us. So let's just select this object and then press Control-Shift-T. Now this time you're going to open up the Metal 038, again links in the description if you want to download all the textures that I'm going to be using. So again, you're probably going to see some other files, but I just want to use the color and then hold down the Control key, the metalness, the normal GL, and the roughness, and then just click on Principled Texture Setup, and then it's going to automatically set up the material for us. Now again, you can see because we have that array modifier turned on the modifier properties, it's just arraying the same exact thing, and so the texture is tiling. So what we need to do is right here, we need to click on this and then click on Apply to apply the array modifier. So now if you tap in edit mode, you can see that's applied, and these are all separate. So I can now press U, and this time I want to unwrap Smart UV Project, and then just click on OK. This is just going to unwrap it very nicely, and the Smart UV Project does work really well for square kind of objects, so that looks very good. Now it is a little bit too small right now, so let's go over to the UV editing tab, and then I'm going to just make sure I'm in edit mode and press A to select everything. So then right over here, here's our UV mapping. We can press A to select all of the UV mapping, and I'm going to press S to scale and just scale it way up, just so that we have a lot more detail in there. So something like that is probably pretty good. So let's press Ctrl S to save, and then we can go back over here to the shading tab. All right, now there are just a few things I want to do to edit the material. So the first thing that I want to do is change the base color and just make it a little bit darker. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for an Rgb Curves, and I'll just drop the Rgb Curves right here. Now on this C value, we can click and drag a dot, and we can drag this down, and that'll make it a bit darker, and that does look nice. Now also I want to change the roughness values right here. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a color ramp node, and I'll just drop the color ramp node right here. So you can see if we take this black tab and turn it up make it closer to the white value, it's going to be more shiny. And then if we take the white value and drag it closer, it's going to be more rough. So what I want to do is I want to make it a bit more contrasty. So the parts that are shiny are going to be more shiny and the parts that are rough are going to be even more rough. So if I just drag these both out a little bit, now you can see that the rough parts are very rough and the shiny parts are more shiny. So that just gives a little bit more contrast, and I do think it makes the material look pretty nice. All right, and then let's just go right over here to our other room. Let's just go inside here and see how this is looking. So because it's so far away, you're not really able to see much detail, but you can see that if you zoom way in, you're able to see a little bit of tiling there. It's repeating the texture. So what I'm going to do on this object right here in the other room is again go to the array modifier and apply it, and then also apply the first array. So we're just applying both of those. So now if we tap into edit mode, you can see they are all geometry. So now in edit mode, I can press U, and I just want to do the Smart UV project, and then just click on OK. And now if we press Z and move our mouse up to go into rendered view, you can see that looks a lot better. Now again, the texture is a little bit too small, so I'm going to click right over here on the UV editing tab, and I can just press A to select everything, and then I'll press S to scale, and we are going to scale it up a bit, just like that, so the detail is a little bit better. Let's zoom in here. Yeah, that does look a lot better. Okay, I'm going to go back to the shading tab, and then we can press 0 to go into the camera view. Now from the camera's perspective, you're not really able to see underneath the tiles, but underneath the tiles you can see that we haven't added a material yet for this object. Now we are going to add a material for it, but just in case there's any like light reflections or anything like that, I want to add that tile material down here on the floor as well. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to select this object here, and I'm going to click right over here on the material properties, and then right down here on the drop down, I want to choose the tunnel walls material. So it just has the tunnel walls. But then right down here on the ground, I want it to be using the ground material. So I'm going to click on the plus right here, and that's going to add a new material. And then on the drop down, I can change it to the floor material. Now I want to assign it to the floor material because right now it's using the wall material, but I want the ground here to be the floor material. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, and then I can press 3, and that is going to go to the face select. Then I can just select this face, and then I want to assign the floor material to this. So I'm going to click on the floor material, make sure the floor is selected, and then you can click on the assign button, and now it's going to be assigned to the ground. So that looks very good, although you can see that there is another face right here. So I'll click on this face, and then click on the floor, and then click on assign. And there we go. Now it all has that ground material. Now if you look in the camera view, you can see that the material is really stretched, and that is because the UVs are stretched. So I want to re-UV unwrap this object. But before we do that, I want to also apply the mirror modifier, because you can see that it's the exact same texture on both sides, and that wouldn't look very good if it was mirrored right here. So what I'm going to do is go right down here to the modifier properties, and then on the mirror, I'm going to click on this little button and then click on apply to apply it. So I can now tab into edit mode, and I'll press A to select everything. Then I'm going to press U, and I'm just going to click on the Smart UV project because that works really well for square objects, and then I'll click on OK. So that is looking better, but I need to go over to the UV editing and I need to change the scale. So I'm going to click on the UV editing tab, and then I'll also press 0 to go into the camera view so that we can preview the material. So then right over here, you can preview the UV islands. I'm going to press A to select everything, and then I can press S to scale, and I'm going to scale that way up so it has a lot more detail. And then also you can see that those cracks are going sideways, but I want to make them going up and down. So right over here on the UV islands, I'm going to press R to rotate, and I'll type in 9, 0, and enter just to rotate that over by 90 degrees. So let's just click back over on the shading tab, and then we can go into the rendered view. And then I'll zoom in here, and I'm going to click on this little beam, and this beam, I want to have the pipes material. So right here, I'm going to click on the drop down, and I'll just click on the pipes, and there we go, we have the pipes material. Now if I zoom in here, you're able to see the actual tiling of the texture, and that's because the texture is scaled up way too big. So what I want to do is actually duplicate this material and then just change the scale of the texture. So right over here on the pipes, I'm going to click on this button right here, the little file icon, and that is going to duplicate the material but keep the same data. So now I can rename this to like beams, just like that. So now I can change the mapping. So to change the mapping, I'm going to click on this scale, and then I'm going to drag down, and then I can drag left and right, and that is going to change the scale. So I don't want to scale it bigger, I want to scale it smaller so that you can't really see the tiling. So I'm going to scale it a lot smaller, something like that. And now it is much harder to see it repeating itself, but you can still see there's like a bit there, and then there's a bit of a rust there, and then there's some more rust. So to make it even harder to see that repetition, you can change the rotation Y value. So if you change that rotation, now it's going to look a bit more random, and you could change some other things like the X rotation and the Z rotation, but that is going to make it a lot harder to see the repetition. And also from this far away, it's going to be really hard to notice. All right, now we haven't done any materials for this top piece right here, so let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing that I want to do is, again, I want to add the pipe material, pipes, because I want it to use the pipe material. That looks pretty good. But if I go down into the material preview, you can see that it's repeating itself by a lot, and I don't really want this. So what I'm going to do is, again, duplicate the material, and then I can change the mapping. So I'm going to click right here on the file icon, as that is going to duplicate it, and then I'm going to call it maybe metal top. Just something like that. All right, now I also want to apply the array modifier so that it's not the same exact thing. But before I do that, I want to set the material for the lights. So if I just go into edit mode and press A to select everything. Here we go. Here is our object. So what I want to do is I just want to make these little tube lights be a separate material. So I first need to select them. So I'm just going to hover my mouse over them and then press the L key, and that is going to select all of the linked vertices. So we just have these two selected. And then right over here on the material properties, I want to add a new material into the slot. So I'm going to click on the plus here to add a new material, and then I can click on new. And this one, I want to rename this to lights. And then on the surface here, I don't want it to be principled. I want it to be emitting light. So I'm going to change it to the emission. Now on the strength here, I want to set the strength to like a 5, so it's a lot stronger. And then the color here, I do want it to be just a slightly blue light, so I will make it a little bit blue. Now right now it's still using the metal top material, and that is because we need to assign the light material to that part of the object. So just make sure the lights are selected and make sure that these little tubes here are selected. And then in edit mode, you can click on the assign button, and there we go. Now you can see that they all have that bright material. All right, so now that that is applied, I want to click right back over here on the material properties and just click on the metal top material. So this isn't using UVs, it's just using the object coordinates. So I want to change the scale again to make it so it's harder to see that repetition. So on the scale here, I'm going to click, drag down, and then I can drag back and forth, and I want to make the number a lot smaller to something like that. And then I also want to give it a random rotation, so I can just change all these values and just give it a random rotation just so that it's harder to see that repetition, and maybe make this a little bit bigger. So now if you take a look at that metal, you can see that it all looks very random. That looks very good. Now I also want to make this object more shiny. So let's press Z and move my mouse up to go into the rendered view. And I do want to make this object more reflective. So right here on the roughness, we can change the roughness value to make it more shiny. So I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and I'll just drop the color ramp right in here so that we can play with those values. So if I take the black tab and start to drag it out, you can see that it's going to make it more and more shiny. So you can see there, it's definitely a lot more shiny. You could also press Z and go into the material preview to see that a little bit better, and just kind of look around to see how shiny you want it to be. So you can see changing that black tab is changing how shiny it is. I do want it to be a bit shiny, but not super shiny. So something like that is pretty good. And then if I click back over on the lights, I do think I want to make that just slightly more blue. So something like that is pretty good. Now you can see that these lights aren't glowing very much. They are glowing a little bit, but not very much. So I want to make them glow more. So to make them glow more, I'm going to click right here on the render properties. And then right here, we turned on this bloom. I'm going to open up the bloom, and then we can change the settings. So this intensity here, I want to turn this up to make it so they're glowing a bit more. So I'm just going to turn the intensity all the way up to 1. And then on the color here, you could make this very slightly blue, and that way the glare is going to be a bit blue. So something like that looks pretty good. All right, so now let's do the Sci-Fi Box material. So I'm just going to select the Sci-Fi Box, and then we can click on New, and we can just call this Box. Now, again, I talked about this earlier. You could totally go ahead and model a more detailed Sci-Fi Box, but I don't want this tutorial to go on super long. So in your own time, you could definitely go ahead and model a more detailed Sci-Fi Box. I'm just going to use this very basic one, and then I'll use a Sci-Fi texture to make the box more detailed. So I'm going to click on the principled BSDF, and then I'm going to press Control-Shift-T. And then this time you're going to locate to the metal walkway 010. And I just want to use the color the metalness, the normal GL, and the roughness. So you can just hold down the control key and just select those 4 textures. There might be some more items in the zip file, but I'm just going to select those 4 and then click on the principled texture setup. All right, let's zoom in here. That is looking very cool. And then let's go over to the UV editing and just play with the UV editing. So I'm just going to zoom in here and then press A to select everything. And then I can just scale this up if I need to, just scale that up a little bit. Something like that is looking pretty good. Let's just rotate that. Yeah, I like how that looks. So that is very good. You could rotate this if you wanted to, but I like how that looks. So let's just go back to the shading tab now, and that looks very good. So let's scale the Sci-Fi box up a little bit and then maybe move it up a little bit as well. You can also press R to rotate, Z on the Z axis, and just kind of give it a random rotation. Let's go back to the layout because I want to do this in the layout because it's probably a bit easier to do in the layout. I'll press Shift D to duplicate, and then I want to press period on the numpad to zoom into it, and then I can press G and click and hold with my mouse wheel, and I just want to bring this box into the other room here. So I just want to bring it kind of over like that, maybe bring it over right like that, and then rotate it, something like that. Let's go back into the camera view and see how that's looking. All right, I need to press G and Z and just kind of push it down into the ground a little bit, and then I'll press Shift D, click and hold with my mouse wheel, bring it over here, R to rotate, Z on the Z axis, and just kind of give it a rotation. And then I want to have one box be on top of the other, so I'll press Shift D and then Z, and we're just going to bring that up. And then you can just press R and Z and give it a rotation value. Something like that is looking pretty good. Now I think these lights could be a little bit brighter back here. So I'm going to click on this light. Let's go to the light settings. And on the power, I think I'm going to make this 2500. Just so it's a bit lighter. And then let's also select this other light right here. And this one I'll also make 2500. Go up into rendered mode and see how that's looking. You could also move this light over if that looks a little bit better. Something like that, okay. All right, this is really starting to look very cool, but I do want to add a material for this object right here. So I'm just going to select this object and then go over to the shading tab. Now I can actually give it this same material right here. So I'm going to click on it, and then on the drop down, I can just change this to beams, and there we go, it has the same material. Now I do want this object to be a little bit of a darker color, so I'm going to click on this button right here, and that is going to duplicate the material, but keep the same data. So now I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for an Rgb Curves, and I'm just going to drop the Rgb Curves right here. So I can now click and drag, and that's going to add a dot, and I can just make it quite a bit darker, and that is looking a lot better. Now I also want this circular piece right here to be over here, so I'll press Shift D and then Y, and I'm going to move it over just like that, and then I also need to press period on the numpad to jump over to it, and I'm just going to stick it right in place right inside that wall. Just like that. All right, so this is really starting to look cool. What I want to do is I just want to take everything and duplicate it just so that it has one more tunnel and one more wall at the end. So I'm going to press A to select everything, and then I'm going to press B and then click and hold with my mouse wheel just to deselect the camera. That way everything else is selected, but not the camera. So I can now just duplicate this whole thing and move it over. So I'll press 7 on the numpad for top view. And I can actually go back into the layout to do this. So 7 on the numpad for top view, and just make sure all of the objects are selected except the camera. I can now press Shift D, click and hold with my mouse wheel, and I'm just going to bring the entire thing over just like that and just stick it into place there. So now we can go inside the camera view, and you can see that it's duplicating the same thing and moving it over. Now I don't want these sci-fi boxes to be in the same exact location because that just doesn't look very good. That just looks too repetitive. So I'm going to select this box and delete it, and this box and delete it, and I'll delete this one. Now this box over here, I'll just kind of move it over and just kind of rotate it, maybe to something like that. And then also, I don't want there to be another tunnel behind this one. So this little metal beam right here at the very end, I'm going to select it and then press X and then delete it. So now what I want to do is I want to just fill this in so that there's just a wall behind here. So I'm just going to press period to zoom over to it, and I can go out of the rendered view. So right here at the very end of our tunnel, I'm going to tab into edit mode, and then I can press 1, and that is going to go to the vertex select. Then I can hold down the Alt key and I'm just going to select this loop and then hold down the Shift and Alt key and select this loop of vertices. Just like that, so we have these vertices selected, and then I also need to hold down the Shift key and select this vertice right there. So there we go, now we just have that circle selected, and then I can press F, and F is going to fill a face. So now you can press 0 to go back into the camera view, and you can go into rendered mode, and you can see that the UV mapping is kind of messed up because we filled a face in there. So I'm just going to tab into edit mode and press A to select everything, and then I can press U, and we just want to do the Smart UV project, and then just click on OK. So there we go. You can see now that it's scaled up way too small. So again, let's click right back over here on the UV editing tab, and let's preview this. So I just want to scale up all of the islands so that they're a lot bigger, and then I also want to rotate them over so that the cracks are going up and down. So I'll press R to rotate, and I'm going to type in 9, 0, and enter, and then you could also scale this up a bit more, something like that. All right, that is looking very good, but you can barely see the sci-fi beams. They're right there, but you can barely see them. So what I'm going to do is tab into edit mode on these sci-fi beams at the very end, and I want to press G to grab, and X on the X-axis, and just kind of push them in a little bit. And then let's press 0 to go into the camera view, because I want to be able to see the sci-fi beams just because it adds more detail. So let's go into rendered mode now, and there we go. That is looking very good. Now I also want it to look much more dark way back there in the background. So again, I'm going to zoom right over here inside the very back room, and this light right here, I'm going to just delete it. That way, if I go into rendered mode, you can see that it's much darker, and that way you're not able to see quite as much detail. It's just kind of there in the background, but the main focus is up here. And then also, if you want to, this box way back here, it is kind of in a shadow. So I'm going to just move it over just so that it's a bit closer. And there, now you can see the details of that box a little bit better. All right, so let's just click back over on the layout, and we are almost ready to render out the final thing. I just want to do one more thing to make this image look really nice. I want to add a depth of field. So I'm just going to select the camera just by clicking right up there to select the camera. And then right down here on the camera settings, I want to turn on the depth of field. Now you can change the focus object to some kind of object. I want to click on the eyedropper, and then I want to make the focus be this box right here. So now if we go up into rendered view, you can see that the edges are just a little bit blurry. And if you turn it way up, you can see that's very blurry. I don't want it to be that blurry. So I'm going to change the f-stop value to a value of 2. And that way you can see that it is a little bit blurry here, but then most of it is still in focus. So you could really change it to whatever you want if you want it to be less blurry or more blurry. I'm just going to change it to 2 because I think that looks pretty good. All right, so just press Control S again to save. And then also real quick over here on the output properties, I am going to render this out to a 2K image instead of 1080p. So 1080p is the default in Blender, a 1920 by 1080, but my computer monitor is 2K resolution. So I just want to render it out as 2K. So it's a very large, high quality image. You can just set this to whatever you want, and then you can just press F12 to render. And because it's rendering in Eevee, it shouldn't take very long. It only took my computer about 2 seconds. All right, so that is looking very cool. And we can now just do a little bit of compositing to make the final image look really nice. So let's just click right over here on the Compositing tab. All right, let's just click on Use Nodes to use the nodes. And then we did already turn on the Node Wrangler add-on. So I'm going to hold down the Control and Shift key and click on the render layers. And that is going to add this viewer node so we can preview it in the backdrop. And then also, if for some reason you can't see the backdrop, you might need to turn on the backdrop button right there. All right, now my background is a little bit too big, so I'm going to press V, and that is going to zoom the background out. You can also press Alt V to zoom in and V to zoom out. All right, so I just want to do a few things. I want to first add some color correction. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a color balance. So I'm going to drop the color balance right down here, and then I want to plug the compositing and viewer both up to it so we can preview it. So the lift right here, I want to make this just a little bit blue, so that the whole image is a little bit more blue. And then right over here on the gain, I actually want to make this slightly yellow because I think that looks pretty cool, slightly yellow. And then you could also turn the gain up here on the brightness just to make the entire thing a little bit brighter, or you could make it darker if you wanted to, but I want to be able to see it a little bit better. So I'm going to make that a bit brighter. And then I think I will make the lift just a little bit more blue to really pop out that blue. All right, so that's looking very good. I also want to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for the RGB curves. So I'll just drop the RGB curves right there and then plug it up to the viewer and the compositing. So again, I want to make this just a little bit brighter. So I'm going to click and drag and add a dot just to pull that out and make it a little bit brighter. And then if you wanted to make this just look a little bit more blue, you could click over here on the B for blue and just drag out. And that's just going to make the entire thing look slightly more blue. I don't want to overdo it, but you could just make it a little bit more blue. All right, and then there's just one last thing I want to do to make this image look really nice. I want to add a vignette just to make the edges a little bit darker. So I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a box mask, and I'll just drop the box mask right down here. So now I can play around with these two values, the width and the height. So I can just hold down the Shift key to make my movements more sensitive, and you can see if you click on the box mask, you're able to see that little white outline. And that is going to show you how big the box mask is. So now I've made it pretty big, just something like that. So if I Control Shift and click on it, you can see that it's basically white and black. So now I want to blur the edges. So to blur it, I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for the blur node, and I'll just drop the blur node right down here. Now on the X and Y, I want to change these both to 200 so that they are very blurred, and you might need to make it more blurred or less blurred depending on the resolution of what you rendered your image as. So I rendered mine as a 2K image, but if you rendered yours as a smaller image, you may not need to blur it quite as much. So you can just play around with that and get it to what you like. So now I just need to add this vignette into the final image. So to do that, I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to search for an alpha over node, and I'll just drop it down here. And then again, I want to plug this up to the viewer and the composite. So I want this blur to go into the factor, so I'll plug the image into the factor right here. And now you can see that it's putting the white all around the center, but not on the edges. So I want to take this image and plug it into the bottom one, and that is going to flip it. So now we just have this white outline right here, but this top image, I don't want it to be white, I want it to be black. So I'm going to turn it to black. And there we go. Now it just adds this little darkness, just this little vignette around there, and that just makes the final thing look really nice. All right, so we can now just save this final image. So to save it, I'm going to press F11, and that is going to take us back to the render result. So here is our finished render. Let's just click on this, and then just click on the viewer node. You can also start to type it in, viewer node, and there we go. There is our final image. So to save this image, you can just click on image, and then just click on save as. And I'm just going to save this as final render.png, and I will just save that. So there we go. There it is. That is the finished tutorial result. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you learned a lot, and thank you so much for watching. And if you'd like to purchase the finished project files for this tutorial, then you can do that over on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. I'll have the links down in the video description. And also, if you like creating sci-fi environments in Blender, then you might be interested in checking out my Martian environment Blender course. So I've created a 7-part Blender course on how to create this Martian environment right here. So it's a 7-part tutorial series where I show you step by step how to create this entire finished render of this Martian base. And purchasing that course is a really great way to help support me and this YouTube channel. But thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. And I hope to see you in a future video.